Hi, I'm Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN physician. Here's something that just happened, hot off the press this week. Polycystic ovary syndrome, also known for decades and decades as PCOS, has had its name officially changed. So what's the new name? PMOS. So kind of similar. PCOS is now PMOS. So what does that stand for? Polyendocrine metabolic ovary syndrome. Well, that is a mouthful. So what underlied this change? And really, the fundamental question that needs to be answered. Is this change beneficial in the overall view of things or harmful in the overall view of things to the people that matter most, the patients? So let's go back a little bit over the name PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. And let's see if it makes sense. Let's see if it matters. Well, it turns out that to understand where that name came from, you need to understand a little bit about this condition. It's a very common condition. Nobody has exact statistics on how many women have it. Some estimate it's somewhere around 15%. Some say it's 8%. Some say it's at least even 20% worldwide. There's not a continent, excluding Antarctica, so maybe there are people living on Antarctica that have polycystic ovary syndrome or now PMOS. But every continent where there is, people perpetually living has women with this condition. And it is the single most common endocrine disorder of reproductive age women. It is actually a lifelong condition. It doesn't disappear in terms of the underlying metabolic dysfunctions at the time and after menopause. It is the most common cause of female infertility. It is a very big deal. I have been involved in the community of, now I'm going to start off by labeling it the way I'm going to propose at the end again, how to label it. PCOS/PMOS. And I'll give you a little bit of rationale why I am saying that. So for the duration of this little presentation, to keep things simple-ish, I'm going to call it PCOS/PMOS. So let's talk about my involvement. Okay, I go way back in this community. I know all the people that have been involved in advocacy, the real people out there raising money for research, marching through in Washington, D.C., through the Capitol building, going to see the staff people for all the different representatives in Congress and in the Senate to advocate for education and research for PCOS/PMOS for decades. Okay, the people that are really in the trenches working so hard for education and advocacy for this group of women, this very large and often invisible group of women. So the name PCOS has been around for decades. And where does it come from? Well, from the fact that the ovaries of most, I can't say all, but most women with this condition will have lots and lots of little tiny follicular cysts around the rim, or what we call the cortex of the ovary. Sometimes has been referred to as a string of pearls. It looks like little circles all the way around the outer rim of the ovaries. And if you understand, you meaning women with PCOS/PMOS and the medical professionals who care for these women, if they understand the etiology and development of these tiny little cysts, then suddenly the actual underlying etiology will be more well understood. Not completely. We still have a lot to learn about this condition, and tons more research is needed, both for the underlying etiology and for therapeutic approaches. But if we get back to this initial thing with the little bitty cysts, it turns out that in women who have this condition, there is a problem that is happening in the ovaries. So I want to make it clear, this is about the ovaries. And yes, there are huge metabolic and various additional endocrine dysfunctions. But the focus is actually ovarian. Now, I just said that, and now I'm going to backtrack because it may turn out, because we don't really understand exactly what's going on, that the real etiology starts in the brain, in the hypothalamus of the brain, or maybe even in the pituitary, but more likely in the hypothalamus in the brain. But the ovary is the target organ that is impacted in every woman who has true PCOS. Now, why do I say true PCOS? Because PCOS is a specific type of androgen excess disorder. Androgens are the male type hormones. Women with PCOS/PMOS will always have high testosterone and sometimes an elevated, but not severe, but an elevation of adrenal androgens, predominantly dihydroepiandrosterone sulfate, DHEAS. So the bottom line is that to have PCOS, in the vast majority of cases, true PCOS, not a different androgen excess disorder. I can't, in this little time frame, go over all of this, but to understand why that name is actually not irrelevant is that in women who have real PCOS/PMOS, the ovaries are not converting testosterone, which is produced in the ovaries in the special cells called theca cells. They're not converting the testosterone adequately into estradiol, the estrogen that the ovaries make, and the testosterone, like an assembly line, it's made in the theca cells, it moves down the line into the granulosa cells, where under the activation of an enzyme called aromatase, the testosterone is converted into estradiol. Now, what controls the aromatase? It's a pituitary hormone called FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. What controls the production of testosterone in the ovaries? It's another pituitary hormone called LH, luteinizing hormone. What controls the production of FSH and LH in the pituitary? It's the hypothalamus in the brain. So in women with classic type PCOS/PMOS, they have high levels of LH and low levels of FSH. They have plenty of testosterone and they're not producing enough estradiol. Now, exactly why this is happening, we do not know. At least I don't know. If somebody else knows, I hope that they will tell me and I will find out soon. But you don't have the proper FSH signal. Now, FSH also turns down the production of a different hormone in the ovary called AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone, which is such a weird name. Talk about names. In embryological times, AMH, anti-Mullerian hormone, causes regression of certain structures that disappear in the embryo. But in the adult woman, anti-Mullerian hormone, I think, should be called, if you're going to go into names, follicle recruiting hormone, because it recruits all the little follicles. And then the follicles need to be stopped in terms of being produced, and they need to, some need to mature, and then ultimately one becomes really mature. The egg is matured, and it is chosen, I call it the chosen one, to ovulate. In order for that to happen, you have to have higher amounts of FSH. FSH triggers aromatase to turn testosterone into estradiol, and it down regulates the production, like off switch, of anti-Mullerian hormone. So women with classic, I'm going to use the word classic, but this should be all PCOS/MOS, because you have to exclude other types of conditions that can be very mimicking other androgen excess conditions where there's more elevation of androgens for other reasons. So when you have not enough estradiol being produced, the brain has sensors to estradiol. And it says when the ovary isn't making enough, it sends out the signal to the pituitary that it needs to make more. But the pituitary doesn't make enough FSH, but there's no problem in making LH. LH triggers the ovary to make testosterone. So you have this like glitch in the assembly line. You make plenty of testosterone, but the glitch, you don't convert the testosterone adequately to estradiol. So now what you end up in a woman with PCOS/PMOS, you end up with too much testosterone and not enough estradiol. Hence, you end up with a whole array, wide array of metabolic dysfunctions, because estradiol, as many of you may know, is the hormone of metabolic homeostasis. It regulates everything involving energy. We're not going to go into all of that, but not right now. But just know, when you don't have enough estradiol for any reason, whether it's because you're heading into menopause or your ovaries are not good at making it by turning testosterone into estradiol, you live in a body that is going to be metabolically unhealthy. And in PCOS/PMOS, you also live in a body that has too much testosterone. So the brain, which has sensors to estradiol, when there isn't enough, it triggers the pituitary to make more testosterone, because all estradiol in the ovary is derived from testosterone made in the ovary. So the ovary is making more and more testosterone, but still can't make enough. It makes some, not enough estradiol. So then you have all the problems associated with too much testosterone, like facial hair, hirsutism, thinning of the hair on the head, acne, often severe cystic acne, irregular cycles, or sometimes no cycles, huge amounts of infertility, and when pregnancy does occur, unfortunately, high rates of miscarriage and pregnancy complications. So PCOS/PMOS is a very complex condition. And because there's not enough estradiol and there's also too much testosterone, it changes the gut microbiome. This was proven back in 2014. It has negative effects on the liver, high rates of liver fatty deposits, high rates of depression and anxiety, the autonomic nervous system, the flight or fight type of sympathetic upregulation becomes the norm. So women are more stress state. Stress state means adrenergically, like adrenal activation, more cortisol production, and that leads to more inflammation for a variety of reasons, along with the gut microbiome being abnormal, what we call dysbiotic, leading to leaky gut, more insulin resistance, higher insulin. You make and produce and store more body fat. Okay, when you have more leaky gut, you have more problems with bacteria and viruses getting into the body, activating the immune system, which can make antibodies against the bacteria or virus getting in, but also against ourselves through molecular mimicry, because all living things have similar nucleotides, the building blocks of RNA and DNA. So there's more autoimmune, particularly Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, autoimmune thyroid. There is more inflammation, insulin resistance. Then when you have more insulin resistance, you're also going to have higher rates of blood sugar, which can cause other forms of damage in the body. The inflammation and also lack of estradiol sufficiency increases vascular dysfunction, hypertension, hyperlipidemia. You don't make enough nitric oxide, this critical gas that requires adequate amounts of estradiol for the enzyme that's involved in its production, which also goes along with vascular constriction. And I mentioned the autonomic nervous system being more in the stress state, because you need to have estradiol to support the vagus nerve and its neurotransmitter, acetylcholine. You see, what does that tell you? That actually the name PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, isn't crazy. You know what the problem is with that name? Healthcare practitioners haven't had enough education. There hasn't been widespread public education about this complex total body metabolic endocrine many endocrine organs that are impacted. What are some of the endocrine organs I already mentioned? The adrenal, because, and I didn't get into it even completely, but when you have stress and you have upregulation of the sympathetic part of the autonomic nervous system and you have adrenergic activation, you make more cortisol. But you don't just make more cortisol, because the hormone from the pituitary that causes you to make more cortisol simultaneously causes you to make more what? DHEAS, the adrenal androgen. So you make more androgens from the adrenal, more cortisol, so adrenal involvement. I mentioned thyroid. Women with polycystic ovary syndrome / PMOS have higher rates than the average female population for autoimmune thyroid. So thyroid is involved. When you have autoimmune thyroid, often you will have hypothyroidism. Okay, so there's 2 extra endocrine organs that I mentioned right there. And of course, the ovaries, which is an endocrine organ. And the pituitary gland is an endocrine organ, and it's not making enough FSH. And it ultimately, in most cases, it's making too much LH. And we don't even know why it's making not enough FSH. We know why it's making too much LH, because the brain is telling it to make more LH, to make more testosterone, hopefully for the purpose of making more estradiol, if it could only convert that testosterone properly to estradiol. So PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, clearly was an imperfect name, but the more imperfect thing was the lack of adequate education among healthcare providers and the general public, which resulted in a lot of confusion and loss of proper treatment because of lack of adequate diagnosis, and just a general downplaying of the significance of this critically complex and vitally important syndrome. And now, why do we call something a syndrome? Because it includes many different symptoms, and we don't truly understand exactly what's causing it, or maybe more than one thing is causing it. So what are some of the good things about the new name? And I want to make it clear there are some good things about the new name, because the idea behind having this new name, and I want to go into a little bit about all the work and time and effort that went into creating this new name of what? Let me say it again, okay? PMOS, polyendocrine metabolic ovarian, I should say, ovarian syndrome. Let me say that one more time. PMOS, polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome. So we already made it clear, yes, this condition involves more than one endocrine system. That makes it poly, okay? And what about metabolic? Oh, big time. It's involved in metabolic dysfunction. Because remember this, never forget this, quote me on it, estradiol is the master of metabolic homeostasis. Homeostasis is like, when everything is copacetic, everything is as it should be. Metabolism, the creation, distribution, utilization, storage of energy, the spark of life. Metabolism malfunction is so common in women with this condition, PCOS / PMOS. And that's because of a deficiency state, I should really say insufficiency. They make estradiol. They just don't make enough of estradiol, and of course a surplus of testosterone. And then on top of that, from the adrenal gland, too much cortisol and often too much DHEAS. And that creates metabolic havoc when you have all this happening. So I already mentioned, you have more cardiovascular risk. You have more diabetes. By the time a woman with this condition reaches age 40, she has 7 times the risk of having diabetes. High rates of obesity because of all the insulin resistance and the inflammation. Also, a lack of adequate estradiol makes it really hard to burn fat and glucose, because all those mechanisms require estradiol. Remember, estradiol, the master of metabolic homeostasis. So you're not good when you have this condition at burning glucose and burning fat, but you are very good at creating fat and storing fat. different skill set. So the new name is to try, and I appreciate this, it's to try to make greater awareness of the fact that this is a complex metabolic involving many different metabolic issues like cardiovascular health, glucose regulation, fat burning, all of those things. That it also involves the ovary. Yay, I'm glad that that's included. And that, involves more than one endocrine organ. The reality is that this condition is much more complex than that. Because in the name, if you think the name of a medical condition should explain everything, what does that? Can you tell me one medical condition or disease where the name explains everything about the condition? I don't think such a thing exists. In fact, many medical conditions, the name has nothing to do with anything. And let's name a couple where the name of the condition tells you nothing about the condition. How about diabetes? What does the name diabetes tell you about what diabetes is? And then there's diabetes type 1, diabetes type 2, and now there's diabetes 1.5. Okay, it doesn't tell you anything. What does any of that mean to someone who doesn't know anything? What about Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease? There are many disease states that don't tell you anything about what the disease is, does, or how it came about. There is a trend now to changing the names of medical conditions. And it's for the purpose, and sometimes I wonder, what is the purpose? But I'm going to assume the purpose is to educate and promote knowledge and help with better diagnosis and hopefully better treatment. And in the case of this condition, hopefully earlier diagnosis. For the life of me, I don't understand how women can have trouble getting a diagnosis from their healthcare professional because it's not that hard. I don't want to get more into everything, but there are guidelines for how to make the diagnosis, and it's like 2 of 3. This is a committee of doctors that came up with this. So you have irregular or no menstrual cycles, or you have these tiny little cysts around the rim of the ovaries, and they came up with 20 on at least one ovary, or you have high levels of anti-Müllerian hormone, and that's either or of those. And then you have elevated testosterone. You could also have mild elevation of DHEAS from the adrenal. So you can have 2 of any of those. Now, in my own practice, I can't imagine a woman who has absolutely perfectly normal testosterone. I also can't imagine a woman who has, doesn't have hirsutism or acne or anything, because then it's probably something else. But, I wasn't asked about how to create the diagnostic coding or the criteria. So anyway, it's not that hard. So to me, what's the problem? Maybe there's something in the name. The name PCOS does have some problems in that it's certainly for someone who doesn't understand anything about the condition. If all they hear is polycystic ovary syndrome, they may think that you have to have a lot of big cysts. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about tiny little follicular cysts. These are not tumorous cysts. These are not cancerous cysts. These are just very unique, tiny little follicular cysts. And I've seen patients too who said, oh, I kept getting ruptured cysts. I have polycystic ovary syndrome. I'll have to say, no, that has nothing to do with polycystic ovary syndrome. Could you have polycystic ovary syndrome? Yeah, but that's not what this is about. It's not having big cysts that rupture. These are tiny little cysts around the rim. So there is confusion widespread among healthcare professionals and the population about what that really meant. So what about the new name? Maybe that will help. I'm hoping it will help people to understand a little bit more about it. I'm hoping it will gain more attention for this condition. So here's the dilemma, okay? So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with PMOS. Here's the thing. After a while, maybe a couple of years, will people even know what PMOS stands for? Polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome? I don't know. Probably not. They'll use the letters PMOS. I'm concerned they may think it's a division of PMS. Premenstrual syndrome kind of sounds alike. PMS, PMOS. That could create confusion right there, right? Since they're all women who are having these conditions. And what else? Well, there's obviously not everything included in PMOS either. It doesn't say anything about all the pregnancy complications, the irregular cycles, the infertility. But yes, it has the word ovarian in it. So it gives you a clue, has something to do with the ovarian function in some way. So 2 thumbs up for that. The real question to me is it really going to matter? There are many medical conditions who had their name changed. Let me give you one other example, okay? Interstitial cystitis. They decided, I think it was the urological groups, that it didn't really tell you what is really going on, and it didn't make all that much sense. So they changed the name to like painful bladder syndrome. And then some people called it burning bladder syndrome. So, but people get so confused. So it's still called interstitial cystitis. Sometimes they add on some other letters involving painful bladder syndrome. And then there's chronic fatigue syndrome. They changed the name to ME. And now off the top of my head, I can't remember what the M stood for, but the E stands for encephalomyelitis. Well, and then everyone knows the name chronic fatigue syndrome. So they made it ME/CFS for chronic fatigue syndrome. Did that make chronic fatigue syndrome better understood, better treated? I don't know, but I don't think so. Maybe, I'm not sure. But a lot goes into changing the name. Let's think about PCOS/PMOS. There are huge numbers of research articles that are archived on PubMed with the name polycystic ovary syndrome and PCOS. There are many books written with those letters. There are many advocacy groups, nonprofits who have the old name. Even there's other groups, business groups, or we won't even go into them. We'll just talk about the nonprofits and all the articles and books that are out there. You can't make it hard to find them. Searchability matters. All the information that's already been created on PCOS can't just be hard to find. So you have to have searchability so that when research is done, it's not all what's been done all these past decades isn't lost. Not now, not ever. There are organizations that are nonprofits. They work on donations. Everything they have is branded with PCOS. The cost of changing the name is huge. Everywhere where it says PCOS, the name would have to be changed. On all of these organizations, products, websites, educational materials, don't underestimate the real financial cost to the groups that have been working so hard, dedicating their time, they're donating their time. I have worked personally with these organizations. I've seen the effort that has gone in, all the volunteers that came. I was a volunteer. I went and spoke to my representatives in Congress and the Senate to advocate for PCOS. I have donated my time to do lectures for these organizations. They deserve better than to be now expected to pay the cost of changing everything they own. What about, libraries and other organizations that now will have to change? How about insurance companies? Not that I'm worried about insurance companies, but what about electronic medical record systems? You have to now create new codes, new names. The process of changing a name is not small. What about up to this point? What has it taken to create this name change? Hundreds and hundreds of hours of committee time, of dedicated workers. And I don't question the dedication and the motivation. 2 thumbs up for dedication and motivation to create a name that they feel is going to help spur more interest and understanding in this complex condition. But the amount of time, effort, and money that has spanned the last 14 years to come up with this name change. Could that money and all that time and effort been spent in better ways, more productive ways to create educational programs for medical students, residencies, the public? Could we have done better? Now it's supposed to be a 3-year conversion time to implement this name. What's the time in terms of hours of individuals? How much money is now going to be spent on the rollout of changing this name? What I'm questioning is not the intent, not the understanding that the name PCOS had certain flaws. I agree. For those that are like me, who have a deep understanding of this medical condition, I have written books. Won't hurt me if the name changes or not. I have spoken worldwide on this condition. I have a deep understanding. I have spoken for some of these organizations at their conferences. I have spoken for what will be the name change, Androgen Excess PCOS Society, their annual meeting 3 times, once on PCOS and the gut microbiome, once on PCOS and the circadian rhythm, and once on PCOS and ways to use time-restricted eating and fasting as a therapeutic approach, often introducing many of these attendees to these concepts for the first time. So I've been out there, I have worked with all these people, their intent is great, and I understand that endocrinologists feel that maybe having this condition focused in the OBGYN world, maybe that didn't serve every patient well. This is a multi-organ, multi-practitioner specialty type of a condition that could include psychologists, psychiatrists, dermatologists, endocrinologists, exercise experts, nutritionists, OBGYNs. It could include endocrine infertility experts, people who do IVF and other infertility, women who have complex pregnancies and high risk. They need maternal fetal medicine experts. This is not a one and done, you see one person and everything's perfect. For many of these women, they do need multiple caregivers within the healthcare arena. Those of us like me who have been involved with this condition for a very long time and understand it very deeply, the name change is meaningless to me, okay? Because I know what this condition is. To me, the most important priority should have been, just my opinion, to spend all those 14 years spent on figuring out a name change and all the surveys and all the meetings and everything else that went into creating this name change, which isn't a bad name, okay? But if you look at hours and time and money spent, in my heart, I think we could have done better. I think we could have spent this money, time, and all these experts putting their time and effort and expertise into doing more than just changing a name. I think from the get-go, we should have been focused on education of up-and-coming young doctors, experienced doctors out there in the world who just never had the education on this condition, and the public. I have been trying so hard, my own little self, to try to educate on this topic for a very long time. I do hope that this will bring this condition more visibility, more attention, more money for research, more money for education, and maybe I will change how I feel over the next 3 to 5 years because I'm open-minded. And we'll see what happens, okay? Or maybe things will be dramatic and I'll say, whoa, best idea ever was to change that name. So what do I recommend? And what am I going to do about this name? Well, like many of the other medical conditions, like when they changed chronic fatigue syndrome to ME, they did it this way, ME/CFS. They use interstitial cystitis, IC, and then they use like burning bladder syndrome letters. Okay, many conditions have now blended the old name with the new name. So that's what I'm going to do, and maybe others will follow suit. So what am I going to call this condition? PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, / PMOS, polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome. PCOS / PMOS. That's my solution. Maybe that's the best of both worlds. Maybe I'll be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. And this name change will open doors to incredible research, education, and knowledge, and way better care for patients. And hopefully, the nonprofits and the other organizations that now have to bear significant costs because of this name change, that they will be able to still provide their advocacy services in spite of these unplanned costs that they will have to bear. And hopefully, PCOS/PMOS will be what this condition will be called, since PMOS isn't going away. I accept that, but PCOS can't go away either. There's too much legacy in that name, too many decades, too much research, too much that is attributed to PCOS. We can't have it that it's not searchable. Searchability matters. We have to be able to find everything that's written in the past with PCOS as the name. I have written multiple articles. You can find it on PubMed. You can put my name in and you can search for PCOS articles with my name on it. Those articles and many others, not just mine, need to be findable, need to be searchable. So everything can be cross-referenced. PCOS/PMOS. Let's hope, I hope, that others will think the way I think, that we'll keep both names and we'll forge forward with better teaching, advocacy, research, and care for women. Because who is this really about? The women, the patients with PCOS/PMOS.